Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of A Haunted House 2. So whenever we go to the movie theaters, which is Harkins, we are greeted by this mentally handicapped kid who, breaks off the ticket stubs and lets us in. And he's a very, very nice kid, very sweet, and he's very enthusiastic. I always liked him because he always seems to really enjoy his job. But whenever we're going through, he always says once he sees what movie we're going to see, "Oh, I hear this one's really good. Please let me know if it's just as good as everybody says it is." Or, "I saw it's really funny," or "It's really scary," or "exciting," or "awesome," or, he's always making comments like that as we go through, and once again, very enthusiastic, very energetic, very nice. Well, this was kind of disheartening because I went in there to see A Haunted House 2 today on my own because I usually go to the movies with my dad. It's our bonding time, and he's out of town, so I just had to go on my own because nobody I knew wanted to see A Haunted House 2. Oh, that was, in itself is embarrassing, but not quite as embarrassing as when I saw The Seed of Chucky on my own and I was the only person in the theater when the workers come through to make sure nobody's sneaking in, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so shameful of me. But anyway, I go to see A Haunted House 2 and I give him the ticket, so he breaks it off and he sees what I'm going to watch, and he's just like, oh. And he gives it back and it says, "Have a nice day." I'm like, wow, that really says something when the mentally handicapped kid is shaming me for going to see A Haunted House 2 in the theaters. So anyway, on to the movie myself. Do I even really need to talk about this? Because let's face it, anybody who's going to do a review on any of these haunted house movies, or really any parody that comes out anymore, is going to slam it. But to be fair, I think I have at least a little bit of a different perspective than most online critics, because I actually do kind of enjoy spoof films, even the bad ones. They're a serious guilty pleasure for me. I don't know why I keep getting these virus warnings. God damn it. So I always have to see them, whether it's in the theaters or on DVD, and truthfully, sometimes I do kind of enjoy them. I know they're terrible, terrible flicks, and usually they're more groan-inducing jokes than laugh-out-loud funny jokes, but the jokes that work usually stay with me much longer than the ones that don't. So for example, Meet the Spartans. When I remember that movie, I remember the parts that did make me laugh. But when I go and watch it again, I'm like, oh wow, there was a lot of crap in this movie too that I didn't like. And yet immediately after I'm done watching it, the bad parts will just be flushed from my memory. And the real bad ones are the ones where I still have nightmares thinking about just the idea of having to watch them again. So, part of my own redemption is I am the first to say that Disaster Movie is one of the worst movies of all time, and I hate it so much. I've seen it twice, and both times it literally made me nauseous, and I'm not exaggerating. After I left the theater for that first time, I felt sick, and then I ended up having to watch it. I watched it again on TV just to see if maybe I'd have softer feelings regarding it during my second viewing, and I ended up getting the stomach flu immediately after that. And I blame Disaster Movie for that 12 hours of hell where it seemed like me shitting and vomiting just non-stop. I know you did not probably want to know that, but I wanted you to know that. So do not watch Disaster Movie. So I'm getting a little bit off track. A Haunted House, even though I like spoof films, I was not fond of that film either. It's not the worst, but I was just kind of bored. And usually, spoof movies don't bore me. They might annoy me, they might give me headaches. Scary Movie 5, for example, not very funny, or not funny at all. But I was never bored, I was just kind of annoyed by it. But Haunted House just had so much downtime, and I don't know if this is how the behind-the-scenes making of the movie worked. I totally botched that sentence. I'm just saying how it looks on screen. It really felt like there was no script. It really just, I don't know, when I was watching it, I kept thinking it was just Marlon Wayans and his friends were all probably hanging out one day, and then they got out a camera and decided just to shoot a movie then and there. So they filmed 90 minutes or however long the movie was worth of material, and even though these people were all very amusing, and they do have some amusing moments within the film, for the most part, they just seemed unsure how to make these scenes funny, so you just got a very slow-paced, meandering Paranormal Activity ripoff that occasionally attempted to be comedic, even though there was a lot of time where I just felt like I was watching Paranormal Activity 4. Not a good thing, especially when you're supposed to be funny. But seriously, if you watch that film, there's a lot of time where it's like it forgets to be a comedy. But then even the big jokes, the jokes that are supposed to make you really laugh, there was a few good ones, but for the most part they were just kind of annoying. But usually I was just bored. And I don't really know why they decided to make a sequel to A Haunted House, because just because people will go and watch a movie in the theaters and it might make quite a bit of money because of that, it doesn't mean they're going to pay money to see a sequel. I mean, say what you will about the guys who made Epic Movie, Meet the Spartans, all those spoof films that were very trendy for a short period of time. Even they knew that no one probably would go watch Disaster Movie 2 or Vampires Suck 2 or Date Movie 2. I don't know why I'm getting all these... sorry about that. So why they thought A Haunted House 2 would be successful, I don't know. Now, maybe it will be successful, and I will lose faith in moviegoers all around the world until I remember that I, too, was one of the people who contributed to making it successful, to an even bigger reason for me to lose faith in moviegoers all around the world. But I saw it, and what do I think? Well, I will say this, it is definitely better than the first one. Does that make it a good movie, though? Well, I'll get into that a little bit later. For the first thing I will say, in defense of this movie, whether you like it or dislike it, it does feel more like a legitimate film than its predecessor did. It felt like it had an actual script going into filming. For one, there's a lot more locations, showing that there was more planning put into it. It had a more detailed plot. It spoofs a lot more films, whereas with Haunted House 1, it was primarily just Paranormal Activity. Well, this one continues to make fun of that franchise too, but it also brings in Sinister, The Conjuring, The Possession, and a few others, and it felt like A Haunted House 2 had more of a story to play with, and that really did help the pacing, because it felt like something was always going on, and I didn't really feel there was a whole lot of downtime in this movie until the end. I started to get a little bit exhausted and tired of it near the ending, and I'm not saying that means I liked this movie. I'm just talking about pacing and script flow. But at the same time, this might have come out just too late, because The Conjuring I could definitely get behind. I loved that movie and it was a big hit. But does anybody really remember The Possession? I saw that and I thought it sucked, but it doesn't seem like it was that big of a hit. And alright, I liked Sinister, but even then I have to admit that it didn't stay with me for very long. I enjoyed it while watching it, but honestly, until this movie started spoofing it, I had totally forgotten that it had even existed. I mean, you might as well throw in Dark Skies in there, because actually it would have been kind of funny if it turns out aliens were the real culprits and not ghosts, but that's just me. But at least there's that. At least there is more stuff going on. And it felt like there was more effort put into the jokes. There were a lot more laugh-out-loud funny moments in this movie when compared to the first one. And some of them I thought were even genuinely clever. I think my favorite aspect had to be how everybody, for absolutely no reason, is carrying a camera. Obviously, the practical reason, it's so they can get, various different angles on, Marlon Wayans and what he's doing, but I don't know why, but whenever they'd have a shot and you'd see like both kids carrying various cameras or their cell phones and they're filming it, that just kind of made me laugh. I interpreted that as sort of a take that as how stupid these found footage movies are in regards to how everybody always seems to want to film everything, even at the cost of their own lives. But, there are some decent jokes, and there's even a certain degree of character development. So I have to give credit to Haunted House 2 for at least there was more planning put into it compared to the first one, and that's very nice of the filmmakers, considering I would have presumed this would have been a terrible cash grab. I figured it would even go the Scary Movie 2 route, where it's obvious like they're just throwing out a bunch of ideas and deciding what's going to stick and what's not, and yet at the same time somehow that entire plot ended up on the cutting room floor. But nah, I thought this was actually a fairly focused, fairly normally written movie. Now, does that make the film good? No. It's still pretty bad. It's at best just an average spoof film, on par with Scary Movie 4, or Vampire Suck, or Superhero Movie, or Dance Flick, where I don't hate myself for watching them, but I'll probably never watch them again. And I'd even say that A Haunted House 2 might still just barely be a little bit below that, because there are a lot of unfunny moments. Marlon Wayans screaming just got so irritating so quickly. I mean, at first it's kind of amusing because he does have this high-pitched yowl, and very briefly it did make me laugh, but he does it so often that it started to give me some serious headaches. But even worse than that is that the shock humor is more disgusting than amusing, and it goes on for way too long. Okay, I will say this, there are less times where it felt like they were just using all the different alternate takes and for whatever reason throwing them into the final cut of the film. Like in the first one, they had that bit where Cedric the Entertainer is reacting to seeing the possessed chick for the first time, and he'll say something that's supposed to be funny but really isn't, and then there's a notable edit, then he'll say something else. He continues to make these various observations, and it felt like they were using alternate takes, whereas usually they would take the best one and just have that. A Haunted House just used them all, and it was very aggravating because it went on forever. There is one scene like that here, but for the most part, it seemed like they didn't rely on footage that should have been discarded. But there are still a lot of times when just a scene just won't end. The stupid joke just keeps going and going, and it wasn't very funny to begin with, and it becomes totally obnoxious by the end. So like you see some of this in the previews where his dog gets crushed for whatever fucking reason. That was a forced gag to begin with. So you see in the previews, he's trying to save the dog, and he's like, the dog is white, the dog is white. That's another thing. The racial humor gets so tiresome because they beat that joke into you just nonstop, and it's much worse than what the trailers make it out to be. But it's just like there's much more to that whole dog gag, like where he starts giving it mouth to mouth, and he gets a bike pump of some sort, and he's trying to fill it with air, and it eventually kind of just like a balloon fills up and pops and flies all around. It was really annoying. And then there's this part I thought was even worse, where Marlon Wayans has sex with a doll. It's Annabelle from The Conjuring, and at first I'm like, oh my god, this is stupid, it's disgusting, it's unfunny, and then like 5 minutes later it feels like it's still going. Like, Jesus, I really don't want to see a doll toss Marlon Wayans salad. It's just not something I want to think about either, yet unfortunately A Haunted House 2 made sure that image stayed with me. So there's a lot of shit like that. And then there are other scenes, like Marlon Wayans has another sex scene with Jaime Pressley. Am I pronouncing her name right? It's spelled in a way that I think is kind of weird. And I think I actually like her as an actress. She made that Dead or Alive movie. Actually, she was the only person who I think came out of that movie looking good. And, she does have some decent comedic timing, but for the most part, she's underused. I did like, once again, one of the clever moments is how she refuses to believe the supernatural happenings, even though it's so obvious. I thought they did a decent job at spoofing that, but otherwise, I didn't really feel she needed to be here. She's sort of a static, boring background character, whereas the movie primarily focuses on Marlon Wayans and Gabriel Iglesias and the two psychics, and I actually thought they were the funniest. But but she's wasted. But they have this sex scene with her that goes on for once again way too long, and it just was distracting because it drew attention to her obvious no nudity clause in our contract, which is even more distracting when you consider how much nudity is in this movie. So yeah, I don't really know why they had to do that. I don't blame her for not wanting to go topless in a film like this, but I think they should just cut that out altogether. And there are some running gags that are just not very funny, and they're just kind of unnecessary. Like there's this whole thing where at first they're spoofing Sinister, where he talks to this professor who gives him the exposition as to what is haunting him, and but they decide to tie that into a Breaking Bad parody, and at first I was just like, eh, but then it keeps going and they keep coming back to it, and the only part that kind of made me smile was Mark Henry from WWE as a cameo. I wasn't expecting that. The world's strongest prison rapist, apparently. But that was, for the most part, unfunny and took up too much time. There's so many other running gags this movie could have done without. But in general, at least shit was happening. At least I felt like I was watching an actual movie, even if it is a bad movie. And I almost feel like I'm being kind to this film, specifically because it is much, much better than the first Haunted House. It's sort of like, I love talking about Bloody Murder 2. Bloody Murder 2 is much, 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 much better than Bloody Murder 1 because it is an actual slasher film with gore, nudity, and a certain degree of style. Now, that makes the movie sound incredibly good, but truthfully, Bloody Murder 2 was a very mediocre slasher. It's just that the first Bloody Murder was so unwatchably god-awful that it makes the sequel look so much better in comparison, and this is kind of like that, albeit maybe to not such an extreme. A Haunted House was a bad movie that I do not think is worth watching. A Haunted House 2 it's almost worth watching once on the small screen, but only if you're like me and you have this self-destructive obsession with watching all the different spoof films. But otherwise, unless you did like the first Haunted House, and I'm not going to guilt you if you did, comedy is very subjective, and it's less about, it's more about using just our immediate emotional reaction to it. If you thought it was funny, then all this critical jargon regarding the film in terms of its pacing and so on is totally irrelevant. But I did not think it was funny, and while I thought Haunted House 2 was funnier, the bad parts unfortunately outweigh the good parts still. So I can't say I enjoyed this. I don't know if it's going to appear on my worst films of the year list, but it'll be close. It'll be sort of like Parker, where I was like, I did not like this movie, but I'm not really sure if I hate it enough to where it deserves a placement on the list. But we'll just have to see what else this year has to offer for us. So that is my review. I did not do a written review, but I have done written reviews of Force of Execution, a Steven Seagal movie, The Bone Snatcher, a horror flick, the first 9 Dragon Ball Z films, and I'll do the 10th one probably tomorrow. So read all of those, please, and follow me on Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. Check out my Amazon listing, and I hope you enjoyed this video. It definitely went on for too long, and I'll see you guys later.